Well, let me start by thanking you for joining today and welcome to our Data in the AI Era podcast. My name is Peter Finter, and in this series, I sit down with data leaders from the financial services industry to explore how they unlock the full potential of their data amidst the challenges and opportunities of the AI era. Well, we've all heard the adage that you can't have an AI strategy without a data strategy, but what does that actually mean? I am delighted that today we are joined by Erin Stanton, AI and data leader at Virtu Financial. And she's joining me today to explore this vital topic of AI data readiness and to share her own experiences of what it takes to make an AI initiative successful. So, firstly, welcome to you, Erin. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today.
Thank you so much for inviting me to be here. I'm beyond excited. I'm actually a avid podcast listener, so I can't believe I get to be on one. It's really cool.
Here it is. Welcome to this side of the microphone. Isn't that awesome?
Yeah.
So, Erin, why don't we start by learning a little bit more about you? Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, current role, your experience, and what you are passionate about other than listening to and appearing on podcasts?
So I currently run the global analytics coverage team at Virtu Financial, where I've been for the last 15 years. It's completely crazy to say that out loud. Just watching how the financial technology has evolved over that time period has been incredible. So to give you a little more background on me, I do want to go all the way back to my undergrad, which was in computer science and economics. And when I went to college, things like Python and machine learning, they weren't a thing. I'm probably dating myself by saying I learned everything in C++, but that's what we had. So about 5 or 6 years ago, I actually went back to get my master's in data science. And I would say that's really where my passion for ML and AI started. What really
Hmm.
gets me excited these days, though, is being able to make active and thoughtful decisions about when and where to deploy I think it's one of the most critical conversations that we need to be having in finance right now and more generally. Just because we can build a model doesn't mean that we should. And just because we built a model doesn't always mean that we should deploy it. There's this real rush to, I think, say everything's AI, be able to say that you're using AI, to be able to put on your marketing branding that you're using AI. But I like to think of the approach should be much more like purposeful. Is AI the right tool here? Is it adding value to the process? And so that's definitely one thing that keeps me up at night, but also keeps me coming into the office super energized every day.
Love that, Erin. Absolutely. And I think you're sharing that perspective with a lot of folks listening to us today because AI has become AI washing. It's become so ubiquitous that it's no longer
Yeah.
meaningful. And I think we have
Yeah.
to unpack it to really understand what we're talking about here. I
Mhm.
think fascinatingly, it's not new either because we've been involved in AI
It's
in one
not.
form or another for a while. But we're gonna talk more about the specifics of the challenges and opportunities that are emerging today. And I thought we'd just start by talking a little bit about Virtue and the role that Virtue has in the world and the role that technology has in Virtue. In fact, your website says that Virtue aims to leverage cutting edge technology to deliver innovative, transparent solutions to your customers. I wonder if you could just explain what that means. What do we mean by transparent solutions to our customers? And maybe you could talk a little bit about how your data strategy has been evolving to support
Yeah.
this goal. Let's start there. How about that?
Yeah, I think the terms innovation and transparency are at the root of how we think about ML and AI, and hopefully that comes out throughout the rest of this podcast. But to talk more specifically about our data strategy, we actually need to do a bit of a history lesson. I'm going to become a history teacher here momentarily. We need to go back to 2016, where we decided to rebuild our analytics framework. This is what we use to support our existing pre and post trade TCA customers. For those not familiar with that term, transaction cost analysis, it's essentially how we help clients understand how they can optimize their trading in the stock market. At the time, so back in 2016, KX was the obvious decision because we live and breathe in time series data. Most of us in finance do, right? So we built up this trade database, we built up this market database, we built up this reference database for things like dark lit mappings. What's interesting is that while this project started with this kind of siloed analytics business, this TCA business, it grew quite quickly to encompass all aspects at Virtue. So this includes pre real and post trade for our EMS or our execution management system called Triton. This includes real time and post trade for our algo stack. And more recently, this includes actually our retail and market making business. So I want to say that back in 2016, when we think about data strategy and, evolving that into AI and ML, that we had this fantastic foresight that all the decisions we were making were going to empower those. We just got lucky. We got lucky with our technology choices, and we got lucky with our implementation of those choices. The result, though, has been that those choices have supercharged our AI and ML. When we think about how that's come to fruition, any data point that we have on our internal and external analytics website, which we call the portal, is available through an API. So that active technology decision back in 2016 means that when I go to build an ML model and I want to feature any data element that's on the screen, I can use an ML model. But more importantly, any feature that I can think of that I could pull market data for, I can actually calculate that on the fly. That was a huge shift. And again, we came to that organically. We got really lucky in that. But I think more recently, I would say that our data strategy has shifted to really thinking about data a lot more than something that's used in reporting, a lot more than something that we just store. And we much more actively curate that and prepare that for future use cases. In a lot of cases, I think future use cases that we haven't thought of yet.
Yeah, that's a fascinating topic in itself, because that speaks to the idea of solving problems and addressing opportunities. How much of that origination or innovation is coming from you and your team to your business partners? And how much is coming to you from them in the form of could we, can we, how could we, the kind of ask you for help versus you bringing them new solutions? You just described the evolution of access to data and the use of data inside of your organization. And it's expanded. It's gone from strength to strength by the sound of it.
Yeah.
And some of that you described as lucky, but I wonder how much of that was really driven by you seeing the opportunity and how much was driven by the business saying, hey, it's been used over here. Can't we use it over here? How do we apply these tools and technology? Tell us more about how it evolved and where does the impetus for innovation come from in your organization?
So I'd like to say it's a 50-50 split, that we go out to the business and the business comes to us. And that might be when you actually look at the development resources that we've spent. But when we look at the things that have been absolutely the most successful, it is the things that come in from the business. These are problems that they've identified, right? So maybe it's an internal group at Virtu, or even more importantly, an external client that comes to us with a problem to solve. Those tend to be the ones that just have more longevity, more success. So we do try to be innovative. We do try to come up with our own ideas and push those out. But I think the ones that have been more successful have come to us.
Yeah, that is fascinating. And I love the fact that you are engaging your clients in that process as well. Do you, just to talk a bit about the process by which you get those new insights and inputs, how do you foster that, given that you know that the best ideas come to you from elsewhere because there is a real problem to solve and therefore a real business value in solving that problem? Can you just share a little bit about this transparency? I love the fact that you so focused on making what you do available to your internal and external clients. How do you foster that sort of environment where you can discover new problems to solve and new ways to create value?
Yeah. So our whole approach to transparency probably first stemmed from pretty strong skepticism around ML and AI about 5 or 6 years ago, which we then decided to combat with transparency. So our main way that we're transparent with clients and the main way that we get ideas coming in is through these monthly Machine Learning Monday sessions that we host. We hold them on the second Monday of every month. And what we do is we present models that we plan to push into production and some models that will never make it to production. And for each of those models, we kind of have 3 pillars that we're committed to being transparent about. So we always tell people what data that we used in the model, but more importantly, what data we wish we had. A lot of our models tend to be very light on Asia trade data. So we'll always be transparent and say, gosh, we wish we had more Asian trade data. It's pretty light. And in some cases, we might not deploy to a region because the data is too light. We also will share the features that we included that went into the model we've gotten amazing feedback from clients in those sessions that say, hey, did you think about this? And in a lot of cases, we're like, crap, no, we didn't. Thank you for that. So we'll be able to add that to the model. But another kind of more importantly, comment on that is features that we actively excluded. So there can be endogenous features, other reasons that you want to actively not include a data point. So we'll be transparent in that. And then the third pillar of that is the model that we actually use. Neural nets, many people might have heard about those. Those are just less transparent models. They're kind of like the black box of all black boxes. So we try in many cases to steer away from those and try to use more transparent models like an XGBoost or a random forest. But sometimes we do have to use a neural net. And if we do, we'll explain what the reasoning, the decision point was around that. So I think those Machine Learning Mondays have really opened up this dialogue. It was first by us being transparent, by kind of putting everything out on the table for our clients. It then opened up the dialogue for them to come internally to us.
That is fantastic. I absolutely love the idea of Machine Learning Mondays. That is, I can imagine
They're fun.
that's yeah, that sounds incredibly valuable because we're really in a learning environment. The reason that we're doing this discussion today is because we're all on the learning journey and we're figuring things out as we go. And there's a lot happening in the world of AI, which is impacting. And you've used AI and machine learning as a way of describing the space in which your team has been focused and operating. I wonder if you could say a little bit more about how you think about AI and the different kinds of AI that you are working with inside the business, because we're going to come on and talk a little about the underpinning of that, the data strategy that feeds that, but to understand the different ways in which AI is being applied. Of course, that is evolving very rapidly. Can you say a little bit more about the AI context and environment that you're operating in at the moment, Erin?
Yeah, so it's funny because pre-ChatGPT, the term AI had kind of died out and a lot of people were using machine learning, but now post-ChatGPT, everything appears to be AI, even when it's what something I would have called 2 years ago was machine learning. So it is important, I think, to define what we mean by these two terms. So generative AI is what I typically consider to be AI. This is like a ChatGPT. So this is going to create new content for you. It can write, it can create images, it can create videos, it can produce other types of content. Discriminative AI, which is what I used to call machine learning, on the other hand, is much more about doing specific predictions or doing classifications based on input data. So this is where this would be a technique where maybe I would predict whether a trade would be expensive or cheap, or even more simply, classify an email as spam or not spam. I know a lot of the Gen AI models have become multimodal. We primarily, when I talk about Gen AI, which we will, I'm sure, at the rest of this podcast, I'm talking specifically about large language models or the text-based generative models.
Thank you. That's a very helpful distinction. And I think everybody appreciates there was life before ChatGPT and there's life after. And you're right, we've had to change our language even to reflect that. The impact is so significant. And yet in the financial services industry and in capital markets specifically, there's still a lot of concern about what generative AI can bring to the table and all of the risks that are associated with that. But we'll hold that thought for 1 second and let's focus in on the data strategy, because underpinning this tremendous shift that's occurring, you've been leading the data strategy for the organization, and it's changed over the years. I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about how it has evolved and whether there were any specific turning points that created a shift in the way that you approached your data strategy.
I think when I think about our approaches to data strategy, there was a lot of assumptions that was made on data points historically. So you would look in our database and you would have a tag for the type of algo strategy that a trader used to execute an order. And that might be an implementation shortfall or a VWAP or a close type implementation strategy. And you would assume that tag, that trade, was what it was, right? It has a tag on it, it has a label on it. And in the reporting sense of data, you would display it that way because that label's correct, that data element's correct, and you would present that back out to the user. But as we've moved more into machine learning and AI, I think we've really had to question those tags and those labels and question what the underlying characteristics of that really look like. So I'm going to give you an example because I feel like I'm talking very theoretical here, and it's probably easier to get into the weeds on this. So we've been working on a discriminative AI model for the last 3 years. Yes, 3 years. It's true. When we first started building it 3 years ago, we built a model and the accuracy was horrible. So we took a step back. We tried again 2 years ago and the accuracy was horrible and we took a step back. And finally, before we did that last stab at trying to get this model off the ground, we talked to our algo team and we said, hey, we've got this great data set. We've got a big data set. We've got labels in this data set. But for whatever reason, our model accuracy is horrible. What the heck are we missing? And they were the ones that kind of brought to light, just because you have this label doesn't mean that all of the trades within that label are going to meet the same standards or are going to look similar. And we realized as part of that conversation, we were missing a really important data element for the parameters or dials that you can put on these algo strategies. We just didn't have it as a normalized input into our data set. So we had to take a step back from that and try to normalize our training data without having that data field. We had to use pretty standard best practices, I would say, for data science, but for very truthfully for us, they were new because our data typically had been so clean and so good that we didn't have to use these. So we used a combination of a couple things. The first thing we did is we created 5 or 6 new features that were used exclusively for filtering our training data. We'd never done anything like that before. We took our training data as it was, passed into the model, we got the output. In this case, we created these features to allow us to kind of identify what these typical strategies should look like. They helped bubble trades that were meeting the normal implementation. We also leveraged PCA or principal component analysis. That's basically a technique that allows you to reduce the complexity in your data. And on top of that, we used IQR, which is an interquartile range. It's a statistical measure that basically helps you identify typical values. So the combination of 5 or 6 new features, PCA and IQR allowed us to narrow down the training data set into a way where it was truly normal implementation of these trades. We'd never done anything like this. And this really, I think, challenged us from a data perspective because we just didn't have to question that the data we had was accurate. It's a label. The label is in sense accurate. It's how the client traded. But the kind of approach or the market conditions, there was something that made that an anomaly. And we just hadn't had to approach that previously. I think that was a real breakthrough moment for us when we think about data. I think it made us really question what we have from a reporting sense. You can put anything on the screen, and as long as that data element is accurate, you can go with it. But from an AI sense, it's not just that the data label is accurate. It's if it's representing what you do.
That is such an interesting story that you shared. Thank you for that, for laying that out for us, Erin, because I don't think you are alone, first of all, in recognizing that this is hard work. This is heavy lifting. This requires effort. But what's really fascinating to me about the story is that it was kind of hiding in plain sight. There was something that you weren't anticipating would be a problem because it was self-evidently correct. So why would that cause a problem? And it was very interesting the way that you described the learning to discover that was coming from elsewhere. Sometimes we just need that objective viewpoint or someone else in the room to say, hey, something's not right here. Have you thought about it? And usually we're quite defensive, aren't we, about our data? It's like we spent years getting our data into the state that it's in today. At least this part, we know we did something good with it. And yet it turns out to be our undoing. And to be able to then compensate for that by deliberately eliminating a data element and replacing it with a combination of tools and techniques, I think is the work of a data scientist writ large. This is really why we get employed to do the jobs that we get employed to do. But of course, that leads us nicely, I think, to talking about some of the hurdles associated with getting ready for AI, and specifically this concept of AI-ready data. Now, that's a very interesting label to add on top of data. There's data, and then there's AI-ready data. I wonder if you might share with us your thoughts on what's the difference between data, the data that we've been working with for years, and then getting it to a point where we could have confidence that the output of the model, which is really what we mean when we say AI applied to data. We're applying the data to a model. The output of that model is what we're using to drive the decision-making in our business. How do we need to think differently about getting our data AI ready, as opposed to assuming that all the good work we've done to date would be sufficient?
Yeah. So I'm going to jump back to actually a generative AI use case that we had to go through that really forced us to get our data AI ready. So a lot of the, I think, challenges with AI readiness is thinking about what's the risk if the model's wrong. So if we take a very simple chat GPT Gen AI example, you ask chat GPT for a birthday cake recipe, right? Your son's birthday is coming up. You want to bake him a cake. So you ask chat GPT for a birthday cake recipe. If chat GPT is wrong and gives you a cake recipe for flan, what's the risk? There's no risk, right? You go to Google and you say, okay, birthday cake recipe. I'm not going to use ChatGPT. I'm going to use Google, and you go on with your day. But when you're using especially generative AI and you ask it a sensitive client question and that model is wrong, that could have huge risk to your organization, to your reputation, and even to your clients. So when we think about AI readiness, it's partly making your data almost risk robust is how I kind of think about it. And there's different ways to do that. So within Gen AI, there's a couple approaches you can do. You can use techniques to basically validate the answers, but where I think you're going to get the most bang for your buck is actually at the root source, which is your data. So for our most recent Gen AI example that we did internally, again, it's a large language model. We spent 3 months this past summer manually tagging our data and going through, and we had this kind of question answer pair that we wanted to feed into a model. We went through these question and answers that we had stored from past interactions, past internal interactions, and we manually added basically metadata tags to them to make the model that much more contextualized to what we were trying to solve. I don't really know a way around that besides that manual intervention. I think one of the biggest lessons learned I've had with a ChatGPT versus what you can actually use at work is yes, ChatGPT knows about finance and it knows about the stock market and it knows about all these things, but does it really know about the nuances of what I'm doing on a day-to-day basis? Does it really know about the nuances of transaction cost analysis? It might be able to explain a VWAP, but does it know the inner workings of the methodology and the background with the clients and all of that? It doesn't. So you as the human kind of have to, as part of the AI readiness, put in some sweat work, some sweat equity, I think, to get that off the ground. One technique I will say that has been surprising to us when we think about AI readiness for large language models is similarity search. It's a very straightforward natural language processing technique where it's been around pre-chat GPT for years and years, but for some reason we forgot about it until chat GPT. Similarity search will allow you to go back into your data and kind of pull out things that are like what you're looking at. So like a client question, like a explanation, like a summary of something. So it will kind of, I would say, speed up some of that human intervention that you need to do.
You raised a very interesting point here, which is around sort of the resources that we invest
Yeah.
upfront to ensure a better outcome on the back end. How do you gauge how much time, energy, and effort is the right amount of time, energy, and effort to put in place to get you to the point of confidence? Because you're pointing out it's about risk and managing risk, which is integral to the organizations that we're part of. We have to live in that reality, and it's always a trade-off. And so there's this sort of balancing act. And one would hope that over time, as we repeat these processes, we get to refine and fine tune and we get to understand it. But you're describing a first time in scenario, right? It's like, well,
Yeah.
we wanted to do something we'd never done before. And we were doing what we could to mitigate the potential risk of a poor outcome from the model. But how did you approach that idea of like, how much is too much? How much is not enough?
So, Peter, I might have had an ulterior motive here when I picked this project. So,
Uh-huh.
I, as a data scientist, am all in on AI. I'm all in on generative AI. I'm all in on all the AIs, but not everyone is, right? There's some skeptics, and even just purely from a security perspective, right? There's a lot of different considerations that go into deciding if your firm can use AI. I really wanted a successful project. So I basically picked for this example, one of the most time consuming things that my firm does internally and targeted that. So there really probably is, even if we spent a year developing this model, I think we would still be in the black on this. And so that was a very intentional project decision. It also was potentially risky because this was a item that everyone knew people spent a lot of time on. A lot of our senior management spends a lot of time kind of interacting with this process. So it could have blown up in my face if we weren't able to get something off the ground successfully, because it would have been a pretty big failure. But when you think about time, in this case, I identified something that I knew was such a time suck that we would have the capacity to do enough research and learn along the way.
That's awesome. That's great thinking. I love that. And I'm also thinking that you took a risk, bless you, and it paid off because now the firm
Cool.
is looking at this going, AI can do something for us that we never imagined
Yeah.
that it could do. And we can trust the outcome from the models that we're running because it's coming from a trusted source. Something that's on my mind, Erin, is just how much, in a certain sense, our pedigree and our history is equipping us to be able to guide and lead our companies into
Mhm.
this AI future because we have been trusted. We have delivered the results that are expected and needed. And we're doing so in a way where we can explain it to others. And indeed, you've
Mhm.
done a great job on this podcast, helping us understand how you have thought about the problem and how you've gone about solving those problems. That issue of explainability is so critical to gaining the confidence
Really
of
is.
colleagues. But I wondered if you might share some thoughts on what's happened as a result, because having made that upfront investment, recognizing the bang for buck was still worth it. It was worth a lot of bucks because the bang would be big enough. Now that
Yeah.
that big bang, as it were, has occurred, I wonder if that has shifted expectations or thinking about AI inside the firm and how it can be applied in more areas to drive even more value. For can you describe some of the ways or areas where you're thinking about applying AI that maybe you wouldn't have been able to if you hadn't had a successful outcome from this project?
Yeah, it's really created an openness, I would say, from different groups at the firm to suggest projects. So we only know so much about issues, time spent that different
Mm.
groups have at the firm. We only know what we know. And so in a lot of cases, I think there's been now projects post this that have been suggested where people have come in and said, hey, would Gen AI be a good use case here? And sometimes it is. And sometimes we might say, Gen AI is not a good use case here, but discriminative AI is. And let's talk about how we can get a model like that up and running. Or in even in some cases, we say, neither's a good approach. Let's just talk about a Tableau dashboard. But it really has opened up, I would say, the conversation. People have been coming in a lot more with potential projects, a lot of great questions, a lot of great feedback. I get pinged articles all the time now from people who a year ago, I don't think I would have ever gotten, hey, did you see this in the AI space? And I'm like, I didn't. Thank you so much for sending that along. So it's really created a open dialogue, I would say, between us and the rest of the firm around AI implementation.
I absolutely love that because it's a team sport. We can't
It
operate
is.
in isolation. We have to have an understanding and appreciation, as you said earlier on, of the real problems that can be addressed and solved. We don't always have visibility into those. But equally, when we're talking to business leaders, they don't necessarily have the language of data science to
Mm,
reference. So we've got this interpretation challenge where they understand their problem, but they don't understand how to make it, as it were, our problem to solve. How
mhm.
do we translate that? And so it leads me to wonder about how you are helping your colleagues understand the potential for AI. Now, some of that, obviously, you've just described comes about in the one on one interactions and it becomes, well, try me out. Ask me something. I am your in house chat GPT. Ask me
Yeah.
any question and I'll give you an answer. But are you doing anything kind of programmatic or intentional around elevating understanding of the possibilities for your firm to help your business leaders, in particular, the non technical or less technical members of your firm, understand what they could be asking of you?
So what you're kind of talking about is what I think of as a translation expert. So there's people out there with specific skill sets that are really good at translating what the business needs and then translating that back to how we can actually implement that in the data science world. I actually personally myself love to do that. I think it's really fun to sit in the middle and kind of say, oh, they said this, we need to translate it like this. And oh, we reached a problem over here. This is what it means. So I kind of think of that as partly the objective of my team, partly my own personal objective is to
Mm,
sit there in
mm.
the middle and be this translation expert. But more broadly as well, we at the firm have done a couple different initiatives. One is we do what we call Coursera at Virtu. So we use Coursera.
Uh,
Most people have probably heard of that. It's the learning software. We use Coursera as kind of like a video. We use their content, we use their videos, we use their practice problems. But we as a firm, for anyone who's signed up for that class each semester, yes, we actually host college semesters.
oh.
anyone who signed up for that course that semester actually attends a weekly call with their colleagues where we discuss the practice problems. So in that, we've held Python, we've held machine learning. So that's kind of elevating, I would say, general understanding about what's possible. But we've also done automation hackathons. So this is where anyone at the firm can raise their hand and say, hey, I have a human heavy task. I think this can be automated. I might not know how to do it, but I think it can be automated. And then we form a group of technical experts to kind of partner with them so that they can try to get that solved. So it's a multitude, right? It's kind of multi-pronged, which is what I think a lot of people have to do. You have a component of education, you have a component of teamwork through and then you have people like me who are sitting in between and trying to translate.
I love the approach. It's very collaborative, isn't it? And I'm wondering, given that, and given the openness that you've demonstrated, whether there have been any particular challenges or even resistance from some parts of the business where you perceive the opportunity to apply these new tools and techniques, but for whatever reason, there just is a high degree of maybe sticking to the knitting, resisting change, shall we say? Any lessons learned there, Erin? Anything that you might point our audience towards in terms of things that have helped you break down barriers and to win the confidence and trust of those who might not be quite there as we start the journey?
Yeah, I think the biggest challengers we had to some of our approaches were actually from our external clients when we first went out 5 or 6 years ago and said, hey, instead of building models through an econometric approach, we used AI. Here it is. Take it. We definitely got some pushback, and that's why we obviously did those ML Mondays and the transparency. But I think what has also helped with folks who maybe are less ML AI excited as me is we also, in many cases, will say where we failed. So both in those ML Monday sessions
Mm.
as well as internally, we will say very publicly, hey, I tried to build this model 3 years ago and I failed. And I tried to build this model 2 years ago and I failed. And oh, by the way, I built this model over here that I never got off the ground. It just sits on the shelf. It is not accurate. I can't do anything with it. It's time spent that will go nowhere. I think by kind of putting yourself out there in an authentic way, by
Mm.
saying you've had failures, tends to open up the dialogue a bit between I'm not just an ML AI expert here. I'm not just trying to replace your job, which is what I think some of the sensitivity comes from. I'm here to help you. And by the way, I'm going to show you where I, as a human, have failed.
I think that's, well, you've used the word transparency several times in this
Yeah.
conversation, Erin. It's like shining a light, and it's a really attractive prospect, I think, for folks to realize that it's not a black box. If the technology might seem to them to be a black box, we as human beings don't have to be a black box to our colleagues. And to your
Yeah.
point, being an interpreter or an ability to say, look, this is where you can have confidence and this is where you can't. And here's how we can mitigate risks associated with it is to me, it seems to has been a very successful path for you thus far, and no doubt will continue to be. But as you look ahead into the future a little bit more,
Mhm.
I'm wondering, as you think about where Gen AI can be used in highly regulated, compliance driven industries like capital markets, what do you think is going to emerge? How do you see AI and the application of AI impacting in the space that you're operating within, Aaron, and within Virtu specifically? And what does that mean to the data team that you lead?
So when I think about the future of AI in finance, it's really not about replacing human judgment. I think that's really important to emphasize here. It's about giving humans better tools to make better
Mm.
decisions. And that's basically what my team is always focused on. And originally that was through reports, and now it's through models, but I'm really just trying to enhance the human's intuition in some cases, enhance the human's judgment, experience, all of those great things that humans bring to the table that AI models just can't be trained with. So at the root of everything that my team is going to do, that is going to be at the crux of it. When I think about AI in finance, I'm actually not getting excited about its use case. What I've been getting most excited about, to be perfectly honest, is there's been a lot of conversation around within my peers around risk tolerance. So where I kind of started out by saying one of my passions is thinking about when and where to deploy I feel like that's catching on. And so, especially in finance, there's a lot of regulatory pressure that we have. I think being public around, we decided to deploy AI here and why. And by the way, we decided to not deploy AI here and why. That
Mm.
trend that we're seeing a lot more where people are okay by saying they're not doing AI in some use cases. That is what I see the more recent future about AI in finance is actually not using AI and saying when we're doing that, as opposed to kind of the really exciting use cases that I think a lot of different people talk about.
I love that. And in a world of hyperbole, particularly in the area of I think this concept that AI can solve all problems in all places at all times is a myth that we have to we have to bust
Yeah.
that myth out, and we have to be open with our colleagues to explain where it does play a role and where it doesn't play a role, and to really major
Yeah.
on the majors. Let's go after the things where we can make the biggest impact and difference. Erin, in terms of concluding our time together today, I wonder if there was one piece of advice that you would want to share with our audience today, one takeaway from the discussion and from your learnings over the last several years, leading data and AI strategy for your organization. What would you like our audience to take away from today?
Yeah, I think when I think about AI, I think about what has driven our success in AI. And I think it's a combination of good data, good processes, but I think more importantly, very honestly, good judgment of deciding when and where to deploy AI.
Good advice. And Erin, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us
Thanks
today.
for
We've
having
really
me.
appreciated you sharing your perspective. And now you know what it's like to be on the other side of the microphone. So for our listeners today, for more information on KX, please just head over to kx.com. Don't forget to check the show notes for links on further resources on data management and AI data readiness. We'd love you to take part in our LinkedIn poll. How confident are you in your organization's ability to manage data complexity for AI? And we'll reveal the results next time. If you have any questions you'd like us to answer or topics you'd like us to cover in future episodes, please email the team podcast@kx.com. Thank you all so much for joining us today. I look forward to meeting you again on a future podcast coming soon.